On December 8, 2022, at a briefing for reporters, Philadelphia police named the boy whose body was found in a cardboard box on February 25, 1957, 65 years, 9 months and 13 days after he was found. His name was Joseph Augustus Sorelli, and he was only 4 years old at the time of his death. Now that they know the victim's identity, police hope to identify the killer and the circumstances of the child's death. On February 26, 1957, a 26-year-old man called the Philadelphia police, claiming to have found a child's body in a box in a deserted area. Frederick Bononis, the man's name, claimed to have made the grisly discovery on February 25, but was afraid to go to the station. However, he then heard on the radio that a 3-year-old girl had gone missing, and decided that perhaps she was in the box. So on the 26th, he went to the police station to report the body. Police officers searched the deserted Fox Chase area and indeed found what Bononis had said. It quickly became clear that another witness, an 18-year-old boy, had seen the body before. But he didn't tell anyone about it because his older brother had been harassed by the police for a long time because the boy had found the body of a suicide in the forest. The child's body was wrapped in a plaid flannel blanket and placed in a large cardboard box from a wicker crib. A new corduroy cap and a pair of baby shoes were found nearby. Law enforcement officials determined that the shoes did not belong to the dead boy because they were a size too big. The unknown child died as a result of severe cranial compression. There was an extensive hematoma on his head. His weight was below the norm for his age, which indicated systematic malnutrition. At the same time, his fingernails and toenails were neatly trimmed, and the autopsy did not reveal traces of systematic beatings or signs of sexualized violence. The skin on the right hand and foot was deformed due to prolonged contact with water shortly before death. This made fingerprinting of the right hand impossible. Skin deformation is actually a common and harmless wrinkling that can be acquired after swimming. The only mystery was that the left hand and foot were not exposed to moisture. After death, the child's hair was carelessly and very shortly cut. The idea that the haircut was posthumous was suggested by the fact that cut hair was found on the boy's shoulders, neck and chest. A living child would have tried to shake them off, if the hairdresser himself had not taken care of it. The child was not drugged or alcoholic, no food residue was found in the stomach, but some black substance was found in the esophagus, which they were never able to identify. On the boy's body, traces of several surgeries were found, which were done a long time ago and without complications. The stitches healed well, and the scars from them faded. That is, the police had on their hands the corpse of a child who had been looked after quite well during his life. His nails were cut, he was treated, he was not subjected to systematic beatings. But at the same time, he was malnourished, died as a result of violence, and they tried to get rid of his body. At first, it seemed that there were quite a few leads in the case. Scars from operations could help identify the child. The box in which the body was found had a sticker that quickly established that it was used to ship wicker baby cradles. They even found the warehouse from which this particular box with the crib was sold, and found out that only 12 buyers were tempted by wicker furniture for the nursery. Of these 12, 8 people were found and established that they were not involved in the murder. A tag was found on the cap, on which the name of the manufacturer was clearly visible. The woman identified the headdress and described the man who bought it. She remembered it well, because the cap originally did not have a leather strap with a buckle on the back. The buyer asked to add it. The blanket turned out to be not so unique, millions of copies were sold. But the fabric itself was heavily stained with machine oil, and a large piece was missing, 78.8 by 66 centimeters. The investigation hoped to find a suspicious buyer of the crib or cap and look for the missing piece of the blanket. But all the leads ultimately led nowhere. The operations, apparently, were carried out somewhere far from Philadelphia. For buyers of the cribs were never found. The buyer of the cap could not be found, despite a good photo fit. And the blanket could become evidence only in the future, if at least some suspect was found. Looking for a piece of flannel in a crowded city was stupid. The police asked the FBI for help, there was a faint hope that the child was kidnapped and his fingerprints were in the Bureau's database. But they did not particularly hope for a result. Kidnappers usually do not cut the toenails of the kidnapped. And so it turned out, the boy was not listed in the FBI database. But the police still had one hope: to appeal to the public. They issued leaflets with a photograph of the murdered boy and a story about his discovery. They described some of the evidence. They asked people to remember if any of the children they had seen or knew personally had gone missing. For example, until February he played on the playground, but now he doesn't. Or parents say that one of their children went away to visit, but this seems suspicious. The campaign to notify Philadelphia residents was very widespread, and it was followed by a flurry of phone calls and appeals. There were many self-incriminations, several promising, as it initially seemed. Leads were found, but they did not help solve the case or even track down the suspect. For example, one woman said that the boy in the box looked like the son of a homeless person who lived with her, paying for his lodging with minor repairs. But the child's mother did not identify her son in the morgue, and then the tramp himself showed up at the police station with his 8-year-old son, alive and well. Law enforcement officers worked tirelessly and put forward various versions of the boy's identity. It was assumed that he could have been from an immigrant family. In those years, children were fingerprinted only on their right hand when entering the United States. In this version, the deformation of the skin on the fingers of the right hand was considered intentional, in order to hide the child's identity. Then it turned out that the murder was planned and prepared. It also explained the lack of calls to the police about the child's disappearance. Immigrants were usually poor and often moved, so the absence of a child who had previously often played in the yard was easily explained. When preparing the leaflets, Chief Inspector David Roberts put forward an original version. He assumed that it was not only the missing boys that needed to be searched for. Roberts assumed that the child had been roughly and posthumously cut. Why was all this fuss necessary? Getting rid of hair only made sense if it somehow exposed the killer or helped identify the victim. The chief inspector assumed that their boy in the box had been passed off as a girl for some reason during his life, and that he had long hair. Remington Bristow, who was an assistant forensic scientist during the autopsy, became very interested in this case and tried to conduct his own investigation for many years. He turned to a psychic woman who gave him a tip about a house not far from the place where the body was thrown out. It turned out that there was a kind of family orphanage there. The couple took in abandoned children and raised them, looking for adoptive parents for them. Bristow's version was as follows: in 1957, they had a mentally disabled child in their care. He was poorly fed and barely looked after, because they understood that it would be difficult to find adoptive parents for him. For some prank, the child was punished or beaten by one of the older foster children, but the force was miscalculated, and this led to the child's death. Therefore, the family decided to get rid of the body. The police considered Bristow's investigation not worth attention, although his information was, of course, checked. In general, due to the wide public awareness, this case remained on everyone's lips for a long time, and even many years later both the police and amateur detectives tried to investigate it. The story of the boy in the box got into several detective series, and in 2009 a film was made about it. In 1998, an exhumation of the remains was carried out and the child's DNA was compared with available databases. At that time, no matches were found. In 2019, the body of the boy in the box was exhumed again. Modern methods of collecting DNA samples made it possible to collect enough material for analysis, and the expansion of databases and the use of forensic genealogy made identification possible. After the last exhumation, with the results of DNA testing and the information collected from it, the police found the boy's relatives on the maternal side and began looking for the alleged mother. To do this, they checked all the women of childbearing age who were in this family at that time. They found the most likely candidate, but there was always a chance that it could be her illegitimate child. Then they began to check the birth certificates of children born between 1944 and 1956, including a certificate issued in the name of the alleged mother. And on this certificate, the name of the child's father was found. Then the boy's DNA was compared with the DNA of the relatives of the alleged father. It turned out that with a high degree of probability this child was the son of this couple, and not some mistake of youth of his mother, which she could get rid of because the child threatened her marriage. The boy's name was Joseph Augustus Sorelli. There was no announcement of a search for baby Sorelli. Both his parents are already dead. But the search for the child's killer continues. Philadelphia Police Captain Jason Smith said about this, "We may never arrest anyone in this case. We may not even be able to identify the perpetrator. But we will do everything we can to try." The case remains open. Even 65 years later.